son did this thing when he was, about 3 years old. He got up on a chair and he put his feet against the side of the table and he rocked back, balancing on those back two legs. And of course, the thing that went into my mind immediately was, stop that, you're going to break your neck, which would have been an overreaction, a lie, and an attempt to control my kid for his own good and my peace of mind. Instead, I got down to his level and I looked him in the eye and I said, if you're going to keep doing that, there's a chance that the chair will tip and you'll hurt yourself. I wanted him to have a realistic framework for thinking about risky behavior and a framework for developing trust. Now that my son and his sister are adolescents, I worry about more than risky behavior. I worry that the relationships they're just about to start developing are healthy. I want to send them out into the world knowing in their bones that respectful, accepting relationships are normal, and that demeaning, controlling relationships are weird and wrong. So, with more love than know-how, I've tried to raise them without all the power imbalance that usually goes along with being a kid. So even though they know it's rude to interrupt an adult, I've also tried to teach them it's just as rude for adults to interrupt them. And this may sound a little crazy, but honestly, my attempts or my desire to get that shopping done right now while I'm in the mood is not actually more valid than their desire to finish that toothpick sculpture they're working on. So to whatever degree this philosophy might have had an effect, there's a chance I hope, have ruined my children for controlling relationships. I also want to save my children from sacrificing their happiness to the rat race. Unlike so many people who hate their work, I want my kids to find a way to grow up to love what they do. But how do you prepare kids for that? As it happens, this is something I know a little bit about. I've spent almost my whole career tinkering with making work suck less. And so I can tell you that to solve the right problems in this area, we have to do something very difficult. We have to embrace multiple counterintuitive ideas and act on them. I'm going to talk about those ideas today, but first, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the myths we hold about why we hate our work. The first myth is that you have somehow failed because you haven't yet found your passion and followed it. To me, this is like the fairy tale of a white knight who swoops in, sweeps you off your feet, and until then, you're just supposed to sit around and wait to be rescued? How simplistic. Relationships are complicated. Love and passion can grow in different ways, at different times, with different people. And although there are some lucky people who find career love at first sight, for most of us, it's something that develops over time. The second myth is that you'll get career satisfaction if you just focus on what you're good at. But when you're starting your career, you don't know what you're good at. You figure that out by trying different kinds of real and meaningful work. And it turns out most people are good at more than one thing. The third myth, this one is actually sometimes true, usually not though, is that your boss is the problem. Most of the time, your boss is as trapped by corporate culture as you are and doing her best, given the limitations and incentives and constraints with her position. And finally, there are any number of ideas about what's missing from the workplace that boil down to the fact that our workplaces are constructed to make it almost impossible for us to love what we do. Workplace dysfunction, the cultures, the structures that make it hard for us to love our work come from the simple premise that we cannot be trusted. Most people believe this, not just about others, but about themselves. High school students report they wouldn't study if someone didn't make them. Employees think they wouldn't go to the office if they didn't have to earn a paycheck. You might believe this about yourself right now, but it is this intuition that can't be trusted. Netflix is an example of a company that's implemented something called endless summer, and that means unlimited paid vacation. But on the whole, employees who have endless summer don't take more time off than employees who don't. And so Netflix gets essentially the same results without having to implement all that control because they chose to trust their employees. Most organizations believe they have to control them. How do organizations control people? By punishing failure and rewarding success. But to do that, you have to give people assignments that are simple enough that it's easy to tell. Did they succeed or fail? And so organizations essentially become these factories for decomposing business problems into manageable chunks that are unambiguous enough that it's easy to measure success. Employees start to look like interchangeable parts, and the organizations believe that they can get better and faster just by offering them incentives. This factory model of work comes from a different time and has based on a few fallacies. First, business problems are not easily decomposed. They're incredibly complex, highly interrelated, and they exist in a constantly changing environment. And what happens in one part of the organization can have a dramatic effect in another part. Second, there's this implicit assumption that rewards will increase performance. But today we know that while that can be true for rote work, for the work of organizations that requires creativity, innovation, divergent thinking, rewards actually decrease performance. One of my heroes, Dan Pink, has done an amazing job of popularizing this research. He talks about the disconnect between what science knows and what business does. I've experienced this disconnect. I suspect many of us have probably experienced this disconnect in the form of that boss. You know that boss. He's the one who believes in control, maybe likes it a little too much, and is convinced the best way to motivate people is with carrots and sticks. I've also been that boss. But there is little dignity in controlling people. And for me, it was an acute sense of that indignity that forced me to look at how leadership by control warps corporate culture. It starts by making rewards scarce. Rewards like promotions and raises become the only ones in the organization that have status. And abundant rewards like genuine respect and real accomplishment don't count. I can't tell you how many times I've sat across the table from an amazing young professional or experienced professional who's confused his status with his value and who heartbreakingly believes that if he doesn't get the big promotion or the big raise, that somehow he is without worth. When rewards are scarce, employees are in a zero-sum game. Their colleagues, in a sense, become their adversaries. Politics become rampant, and work becomes fake. Fake work looks like an insane amount of time spent in meetings where nothing is accomplished, but there's plenty of opportunity to spread responsibility and shed blame. It looks like departments spending more time negotiating who's responsible for what than doing the work they're negotiating. It looks like way too much time spent on people management. Employees become conditioned to believe that if only they were good enough, worthy enough to deserve those status rewards that the organization hands out, that somehow they'd be happy. But the modern research on happiness is pretty clear. Above a fairly low threshold, changes in circumstances like promotions, raises, and even winning the lottery only have a very short-term effect on happiness, which to many of us is as counterintuitive an idea as that we can be trusted. Let me take a minute to recap the counterintuitive realities we've covered so far. One, we can't be trusted. 2, rewards decrease performance. 3, rewards don't make us happy, and I'm going to give you one more. 4, rewards can actually eliminate our enjoyment of the things we love. So, if you love to code, artificial deadlines with huge bonuses attached can easily turn that passion into a chore. What are the alternatives? The balance to hyper-rational organizations are self-organizing environments. Instead of the factory model, we can understand these environments through the metaphor of emergence, which is where you get beautiful, complex results from simple rules. Self-organizing environments have 3 simple rules: encourage autonomy, support the development of mastery, and collectively create meaning. And in my experience, self-organizing teams develop as a side effect the very things that most organizations are trying and failing to create through direct control. Things like organizational agility, cross-functional collaboration, good judgment, employee engagement, loyalty. Employees develop the kind of systems thinking that let them see how what they do in one part of the organization has ripple effects to other parts, and they solve problems in that context. Politics essentially disappear. Management starts to look like mentorship, and employees tend to discover they genuinely love what they do or authentically belong somewhere else. Now, admittedly, my examples come from high tech. What about less glamorous jobs? What if you work on a real and not a metaphorical assembly line? One word, Kaizen. This is a practice we see on Toyota's assembly lines where employees are asked to think like owners. They can improve any part of the process. They can even stop the assembly line. They have real power. This taking ownership comes from a shift in the mindset of every employee and a shift in the values of the corporation. This is an organization that knows how to practice trust. Taking ownership is part of a bunch of practices that bundle together under the new work. We see it in some corporate environments, more often in freelance situations, but I believe it's going to become increasingly mainstream. And if it does, I don't think we're ready. My experience hiring people into self-organizing environments is that it takes a long time to adjust. People have lost the knack of being able to tell for themselves when they're doing real and meaningful work and when they're just gaming the system for reviews, good reviews, and raises and promotions. They need someone to spend time with them and help them see what it is about their work that's authentic, sometimes for a long time, and some people never adjust at all. Now, I don't want my children. I don't want anyone's children to grow up to be uncomfortable in a trusting, self-organizing environment. But it begs the question, if we prepare kids for the new work, are we ruining them for the old work? Will they be unable to tolerate workplace dysfunction? In truth, I don't think so. I think it's much more likely that they'll be those employees who are islands of sanity that don't buy into workplace politics as life or death. So, what about schools? Those places that are supposed to be preparing our kids for a career, college, workplaces. Well, the factory model of schooling prepares kids for the factory model of work. Schools seem almost designed to drive out intrinsic motivation. Grades take the place of all the intrinsic rewards of learning. Learning becomes fake, more about memorizing stuff for tests than learning how to think or apply. And kids become focused on the rewards, not the work. And you know this is happening when you hear things like, will that be on the midterm? How many words do I have to write? Can I get extra credit? And yet there are models of schooling that essentially demand the kids take ownership, like Montessori. There is a lot of trust in a Montessori classroom. There's not a lot of Montessori in public school. In my current work, I'm lucky enough to work with lots of educators who are struggling to shift teaching and learning using technology. And there's this amazing thing that happens. And I actually believe that it's the freedom to experiment with technology that's the catalyst. But teachers come to a point where they say, I could never go back to teaching the old way. Something profound has shifted in them. And if you look closely, it's that they've learned to turn control over to their students. And it makes their traditional classrooms feel more like the Montessori side of the spectrum. And even though they and their students are working harder than ever, it doesn't feel like work. It feels like hard fun. Because these educators have learned to practice trust, their students have learned to take ownership. And it is this trust and this ownership, if we allow our kids to discover them, that will prepare them not to hate their work, but to love what they do and to do the many things they love.